He came to Vermont to disappear, a former Navy SEAL, hoping to trade battlefield noise for the quiet hum of the forest. But on the first night of the blizzard, fate led him to something he never expected. A young detective lay half buried in the snow, bruised, bound, and barely breathing. Beside her, a loyal German shepherd tried to shield her from the storm, fighting a losing battle against the cold. Someone had tried to silence them. Someone planned to finish the job. But they didn't count on one man and one dog being in the right place at the right moment. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. If this story moves you, remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more stories of courage, hope, and unexpected heroes. The edge of the storm, snow rolled across the outskirts of Burlington like a slow white tide, swallowing the trees and barns one breath at a time. Officer Lila Moore pulled her cruiser onto the frozen dirt path, leading to an abandoned farm. At 32, she carried herself with the steady poise of someone who had seen enough danger to respect it, but not enough to fear it. Her frame was lean and athletic, wrapped in a thick patrol jacket that barely protected her from the slicing wind. Strands of chestnut brown hair escaped the knot at the back of her head, brushing her pale cheeks as she stepped out into the cold. The call had been short and strange, an anonymous report of shouting inside the old Whitman barn. No details, no follow-up, just a location dropped on the dispatch line minutes earlier. Lila's instincts tightened. Anonymous calls were often nothing, but in her current investigation into a stream of synthetic drugs entering the city, she had learned not to shrug off the unusual. She pulled her flashlight from her belt, the beam cutting a narrow path through the rising wall of snow. The barn stood ahead, half buried under years of neglect. Its wooden siding had turned gray, and the roof sagged like an old man's shoulders. The windows were black squares, staring at her with the indifference of things long forgotten. Her boots crunched over the ice as she approached the main door. Something about the silence made her hesitate. Burlington's countryside was usually filled with distant sounds, dogs, snowplows, passing cars. But tonight, the world held its breath. Lila reached for the rusted metal handle. The door slammed inward. A large man burst from the darkness behind it, grabbing her shoulder with hands like iron clamps. He smelled of sweat, gasoline, and a kind of unclean adrenaline that made her skin crawl. He was broad-chested, wearing a heavy work jacket, his unshaven jaw shadowing a face carved by bad decisions. His eyes were a cold slate gray, the eyes of someone who didn't flinch at pain, neither giving nor receiving. Lila barely had time to draw breath before two more figures rushed her from behind. These men were smaller, wiry, dressed in mismatched layers of flannel and winter gear, their movements jittery with nerves. One had a scar traveling from his temple down to his mouth, pulling his lip into a permanent sneer. The other smelled of stale tobacco and fear. "Got her!" the broad man growled, wrenching Lila's radio from her shoulder and tossing it into the shadows. "What do you want?" Lila hissed, her voice strained but steady. Her mind was racing, cataloging faces, angles, possible exits, anything usable. She was trained for ambushes, but the speed of this one stole the breath from her lungs. The scar-lipped man stepped closer. His voice was low, oily. "You've been looking where you shouldn't. People don't like that." So, it was connected to the drug trail. Her suspicion pressed down like a weight against her ribs. Someone had known she would respond to this call. Someone had fed it to her. Someone inside her own network. Lila didn't answer. Silence, she'd learned, was sometimes the only shield left. The broad man didn't appreciate silence. He struck her across the face with the back of his hand, hard, deliberate. Pain shot through her jaw, bright and fast. She staggered, but didn't fall. Another blow landed on her ribs, knocking the air from her lungs. A third caught her shoulder, sending a burst of fire down her arm. She tasted blood at the corner of her mouth. Her thoughts blurred. She forced them back into focus. Stay awake. Stay aware. They pushed her deeper into the barn, into the cold hollow where the wind whistled through the broken boards. The floor was hard, covered in frozen earth. Her knees hit the ground. For a moment she saw nothing but white spots swimming across her vision. "Ask her," the smaller man muttered. The scar-lipped one crouched down. His breath was sour, hot against her ear. "Who else knows what you found? Names. Give them to us, and maybe we don't leave you here." Lila lifted her head. Her eyes were wet with pain, but her voice, when it came, was a whisper edged with steel. "No." The refusal landed like a slap among the men. The broad one cursed and kicked her in the side. She collapsed onto her back, air gone, strength slipping. Her consciousness wavered. "Fine," someone muttered. "Let the snow finish it." Plastic zip ties bit into her wrists as they wrenched her arms behind her. They dragged her across the barn and out the rear door, toward the open field where the wind howled with a predator's hunger. The cold seized her immediately, stealing warmth from her skin in violent shivers. They dropped her onto the snow, her cheek pressed to the ice, breath forming faint clouds. Footsteps receded. A truck door slammed. The engine roared, then grew smaller and smaller until the night swallowed it whole. Lila tried to move. Her fingers were numb, her body too battered to push itself up. Snowflakes landed on her lashes, soft things, but sharp against her fading senses. Her heartbeat thudded weakly. Not like this, she thought. Not here. But her body was losing the fight. The wind screamed across the field, and somewhere in the distance, far but not too far, a single deep bark rose through the storm. A warning, or a promise. Whether help would reach her in time, the darkening world refused to say. The soldier with the flashlight, the wind carved white tunnels through the forest as the storm tightened its grip around the cabins scattered near Lake Champlain. Noah Carter finished securing the last storm shutter on the south-facing window of his small wooden cabin. At 40, he carried strength without effort, built from years of discipline and battles that had carved both muscle and memory. His face held the angular lines of a man who had seen too much, too young. Sharp jaw, slightly crooked nose from an old fracture, and a short beard peppered with strands of silver. His dark brown hair was kept neat, practical, and his eyes, deep, steady brown, were trained to catch movement even in chaos. A faint stiffness lingered in his left knee, the cost of a blast years ago in a desert half a world away. Beside him, Ranger, his 5-year-old German shepherd, stood alert. The dog's black and tan coat glowed faintly under the lantern light, every muscle poised with controlled energy. Ranger rarely barked unless something was truly wrong. He communicated through posture, ear flicks, and an unwavering gaze. Now he emitted a single, low sound, half a growl, half a warning. Noah stopped. "Talk to me, buddy," he murmured, though he already knew Ranger's instincts rarely misfired. He clicked on his high-lumen flashlight, the beam slicing into the storm like a blade. Ranger moved first, head low, tail stiff, ears pricked forward. Noah followed, pulling on his navy winter coat, its thick fabric flaring slightly at his long strides. The cold bit at his face, but he ignored it. Ranger's pace quickened, and with every step, Noah's unease deepened. The forest was a white labyrinth, silent, shifting, alive. Then Ranger froze. Noah lifted the flashlight. A dark lump lay half buried in the snow, shaped like a curled figure. The wind blew across it, revealing strands of brown hair stiffened with ice. Noah's breath hardened. He sprinted the last few feet. It was a woman, young, hurt. Her name he didn't yet know, but her condition spoke louder than any words could. He knelt beside her, turning her gently. Her face was pale, lips cracked, eyes shut in an exhausted grimace. Under her uniform jacket, he saw bruises blooming across her cheekbone. Her hands were wrenched behind her back, wrists bound brutally tight with plastic ties that had already carved deep, purple grooves into her skin. She had fought. Hard, and she had lost. Ranger stepped in front of the wind, positioning his body as a shield. Snow gathered along his harness as if the storm itself recognized him as a sentinel. Noah drew a combat knife from his boot. The blade gleamed faintly as he slid it under the zip ties. They snapped with a harsh crack. He immediately checked her pulse, weak, faint, but alive. "Hang on," he whispered. He brushed snow away from her face. She stirred at his touch, eyelids fluttering, but consciousness remained just out of reach. She looked to be in her early 30s, with a strong, structured jaw and skin pale from the cold. Even under injury, her expression held a certain determined line, someone used to facing conflict, not collapsing beneath it. Noah felt something coil in his chest. Anger, recognition, resolve. He knew what it was to be left behind, to be abandoned by the people who were supposed to have your back. He shrugged off the thought. It could wait. She couldn't. He scooped her carefully into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, but the limp weight of someone close to collapse made him adjust his hold. Ranger pressed close to his side, body tense, scanning for movement in the tree line. Noah rose, then stopped. A shadow shifted behind the distant pine trunks. It was brief, too brief for certainty, but the instinct that had kept him alive overseas roared awake. His heart didn't leap. It narrowed. Someone had been watching, someone who didn't want her found. Ranger growled, low and dangerous. Easy, Noah murmured, though it was himself he steadied. We move now. He turned toward the cabin, boots crunching deep into the snow. The wind clawed at them, but he leaned into it, adjusting his grip so her head rested securely against his shoulder. Her breath skimmed his collarbone, thin and trembling. Ranger stayed on the outer flank, body angled toward the forest, guarding every step. The world shrank to three things: the storm, the woman, and the threat that could be following them. Lights from the cabin flickered through the trees, a faint amber glow caught between drifting snowdrifts. Each step felt slow, and Noah's injured knee pulsed with a familiar burn, but he didn't stop. Not tonight. When they reached the porch, he kicked the door open with controlled force, carrying her inside. The warmth wrapped around them like a lifeline. Ranger shook off snow and took guard at the doorway. Noah laid the woman gently onto the old leather couch near the fire, her breathing shallow, her skin ice cold. He covered her with 2 thick wool blankets, rubbed warmth into her arms, and checked her pulse again. Still faint, still fighting. Snow spattered against the window, the storm building into a full blizzard, and somewhere out in the dark, whoever had left her for dead might still be there. The danger had not ended. It had followed them home. The blizzard in the cabin, the storm raged against the wooden walls, like a living creature trying to claw its way inside. Noah Carter pushed the cabin door closed with his shoulder, the wind snapping at his coat before he latched the heavy iron bolt. Snow clung to his hair and beard as he carried the unconscious woman toward the fireplace. Ranger shook off a halo of white powder, then immediately stationed himself near the window, his amber eyes alert and watching the shadows outside. Noah laid the woman onto the old leather couch. Up close, she looked even more fragile beneath the bruises. Early 30s, strong jawline, lashes dark against ghost-pale cheeks. Her uniform shirt was torn at the seam where someone had grabbed and twisted it, and a deep purple bruise was rising along her ribs. He stirred the fire, feeding it split logs until the flames rose bright and hot. The warmth spread slowly into the room, pushing back the cold that had seeped into her bones. Her fingers twitched first, then her breathing changed, shallow but quicker, as if her mind was fighting its way back into her body. She woke with a gasp. Her eyes, storm gray with flecks of brown, darted wildly around the room. She recoiled instinctively, trying to push herself upright, despite the clear pain shooting through her arm and shoulder. Her breath trembled. Her entire body was poised to defend itself, even without strength. Noah lifted his hands, palms open. "You're safe," he said quietly, his voice steady as the fire behind him. But his size alone made him intimidating at first glance. Over 6 feet tall, built like someone forged rather than grown. The cut on his eyebrow from an old deployment gave him a permanent look of restrained severity, though his eyes held a calmer truth. Ranger moved closer, not with aggression, but with a calm, measured softness unique to a trained service dog. He lowered his head, ears relaxed, offering silent reassurance. The woman stared at him for several seconds before the tension in her shoulders loosened. Where am I?" she whispered. "My cabin, in the woods northeast of Burlington," Noah replied. "I found you in the snow." She swallowed hard and tried to sit upright. Noah steadied her with one hand at her back. She winced, but didn't pull away. "My name is Lila," she said after a moment, voice still raw. "Officer Lila Moore," Noah nodded. "Noah Carter, this is Ranger." At the sound of his name, Ranger thumped his tail once against the floor, but his posture remained firm, protective. Lila pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her breathing had steadied, but the shock was still visible in the tightness around her eyes. She stared into the fire before speaking again. "I was tracking a lead," she murmured. "A new supply chain. Synthetic stuff. Stronger than fentanyl." Her voice shook, not from fear, but fury. "I kept it quiet. No reports, no partners, no paperwork. But they were waiting for me anyway." Noah's eyes narrowed, a quiet storm gathering behind them. "So, someone leaked your movements?" "Yes." She met his gaze. "Someone inside the department." She expected disbelief or hesitation. Instead, she saw something else, a flicker of recognition, like someone who knew exactly what betrayal felt like. Noah's silence was heavy, but not cold. After a few seconds, he stood and walked into the small kitchenette. Lila heard cabinets open, water being poured. When he returned, he held a warm mug between steady hands. "Drink," he said, slowly. She did, letting the heat seep into her chest. The ginger and honey soothed the tightness in her throat. Noah knelt beside the couch, examining her injuries with clinical precision. He did not touch her without warning, respecting every inch of her shaken state. "You've got bruising across the ribs," he said. "Slowed breath means no puncture. Shoulders strained but not dislocated. You'll need rest." Lila blinked, surprised. "You're not a medic." "No," Noah said. "Just a man who's had to patch people up in worse conditions." There was something deep in his voice, something shaped by sand and fire and broken ground far from this snow-covered cabin. She recognized the tone. It was the sound of someone who had survived things others didn't. A loud crack hit the cabin wall. Lila jumped, heart hammering. Ranger barked. Short, sharp, a warning. Noah stood instantly, grabbing the worn shotgun leaning against the stone hearth. His posture shifted from caretaker to soldier in one breath. The fire glinted off the sharp planes of his face as he moved toward the window. "What was that?" Lila whispered, pulling herself upright despite the pain. "Could be a branch," Noah said. "Could be something else." He peered through the frosted glass. The wind whipped snow across the porch, erasing footprints as quickly as they formed. No movement, no shapes, nothing visible. But Ranger didn't relax. He was locked on the door, ears forward, muscles coiled. Noah stepped back, lowering the gun only slightly. "They didn't leave you out there on a whim," he said. "If someone wanted you gone, they may have followed." Lila's pulse thudded in her throat. She remembered the last thing she heard before darkness took her. Laughter behind her, the crunch of boots leaving, the storm rising, and a deep, distant bark. She looked at Ranger again, at Noah, at the locked door. The storm outside screamed harder, rattling the cabin walls. She wasn't sure which terrified her more, that the men who attacked her were still out there, or that they might already know exactly where she was. Tracks behind the cabin, the storm eased by dawn, leaving the world wrapped in a pale, suffocating quiet. Snow draped over every branch and rooftop like heavy white wool. The cabin windows glowed faintly, the fire inside still alive from Noah's long, watchful night. Ranger was the first to move. The German shepherd had been lying on his thick rug near the hearth, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. But something invisible brushed against his instincts, the kind of shift only animals felt before humans noticed. He rose swiftly, muscles rippling beneath his black and tan coat, and trotted toward the back door. His ears were sharp points, his breath fogged in short, purposeful bursts. He gave a single low bark. Noah Carter turned at once. He had been sitting at the table sharpening a small combat knife, the repetitive motion serving as a quiet place for his mind to settle. Lack of sleep clung to the edges of his eyes, but he carried it the way he carried all old burdens, silently, with the resigned ease of a man who had already accepted that peace rarely lasted. He set the knife down and crossed the cabin in long strides. "You smell something?" he asked, though Ranger's stiff posture was its own answer. He grabbed his coat from the peg by the door and shrugged into it. Lila, who had been resting on the couch, stirred slightly at the cold draft that slipped in as Noah cracked the door open. Her face was still pale, framed by hair matted from melting snow, and her bruises looked darker in the morning light. But her gaze was alert, watchful. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly, though dread flickered behind her eyes. "For now," Noah said. "Stay inside." He stepped into the snow. The cold had teeth. It bit through fabric in seconds, slicing along his jaw, stinging the old shrapnel scar on his shoulder. But he welcomed it. It kept him sharp. Ranger walked ahead, nose low, body taut with purpose. Behind the cabin, the snow was deceptively smooth, except for a series of impressions that curved around the tree line. The tracks were shallow, yet distinct, left by heavy boots. The stride length told Noah the intruder had moved cautiously, not running, not wandering, but tracking. Someone had been here, and recently. Ranger stopped at the base of a thick pine tree. The needles above were dusted white, but the trunk had a faint scrape, fresh, no frost yet forming. Ranger began to dig, snow flying in small, determined sprays. Noah crouched beside him, just as Ranger's paw brushed something dark. It was a strip of black industrial tape. Noah lifted it carefully. One side still held fibers, a few strands of hair frozen into the adhesive. The tape was thick, commercial grade, the kind used by people who planned, people who needed tools to restrain and silence. He stared at it, jaw tightening. The morning quiet felt heavier now, as if it knew the truth too. Someone had circled the cabin during the night. Someone who had expected to find Lila dead. Noah rose, tape in hand, and scanned the tree line. In daylight, the forest seemed harmless, a cathedral of white and pine. But Noah knew better. Beauty was often a disguise. He had seen villages look peaceful 10 minutes before an ambush. Snow hid sins better than sand. He returned inside and shut the door behind him, sliding the bolt in place. Lila was sitting up, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her jaw clenched when she saw the tape in his hand. "They were here," Noah said. He kept his tone level, but it held the weight of something colder than fear. Certainty. "They came to make sure you didn't survive." Lila's breath hitched. For a moment her eyes drifted, not in panic but in calculation. She had been a cop long enough to understand the kind of mind that executed a loose end. She rubbed her wrist where the zip ties had cut deep. "I need to get to the hospital," she whispered, "and I need this reported." Noah crossed his arms, his presence filling the room like a protective wall. "And what happens the moment someone logs your name into the system? If they have someone embedded, they'll know you're breathing before the IV is in your arm." Lila looked toward the floor, her breath shaky. I can't just disappear." "You might have to," Noah said, "at least until we know who tipped them off." Ranger sat between them, gaze shifting from one to the other, as if waiting to see whose resolve would break first. Lila exhaled slowly. The cabin air tasted like wood smoke and old secrets. Her thoughts raced through names, colleagues she trusted, ones she didn't, ones she wasn't sure of anymore. The idea that one of them had sold her location out like a cheap token made her stomach twist. "No one can know I'm alive," she said at last. It wasn't fear in her voice. It was grim acceptance. Noah gave a short nod. It wasn't victory, just alignment. He knew the kind of war fought under the surface, where the enemy wore a uniform, where a handshake hid a loaded gun. "We stay silent," Noah said. "We stay smart, and we stay ready." Outside, the wind began to rise again, sliding its fingers across the windows. Ranger's ears twitched, listening to the world with a sensitivity neither human possessed. Lila watched the snow drift past the glass. She felt small inside her own life for the first time in years. Small, but not alone. Someone had tried to erase her, but now she had an unlikely shield. A soldier built of scars and a dog who never missed a threat. Sunlight over Vermont. The snow began to loosen its grip on the land 2 days later, melting into soft rivulets that glimmered beneath the winter sun. The storm had retreated, leaving behind a world washed clean, white hills, dripping eaves, and birds testing the quiet with hesitant notes. Inside the cabin, warmth drifted gently across the small living room. Lila Moore stood upright for the first time without bracing herself. Her bruises had faded from deep purple to mottled yellow, and though her shoulder still ached, she carried herself with the steady, stubborn resilience of someone who had refused to break. Noah Carter watched from the kitchen doorway. He leaned one broad shoulder against the wooden frame, arms crossed, a posture that seemed natural for him, as if he had spent a lifetime scanning doorways and assessing risks without thinking. His dark beard had grown rougher over the past few days, but the silver strands at his temples softened the severity of his face. Ranger sat loyally at Lila's side. The towering dog seemed proud of her first determined steps, giving a short, soft huff as if to encourage her further. "You're sure you're ready?" Noah asked. Lila nodded. "I need to be." And she was. 20 minutes later, Noah's truck cut through the thin morning mist on the long, winding road into Burlington. The world outside seemed brighter than it had in days, sunlight bouncing off melting snowbanks, icicles dripping like tiny ticking clocks. In the passenger seat, Lila sat bundled in a dark coat Noah had lent her. The collar was too big, the sleeves swallowed her hands, but the warmth was welcome. She held a small plastic evidence bag in her lap, the black industrial tape Ranger had dug up behind the cabin, one simple object that meant everything. Her pulse thrummed with a mix of fear and purpose. They were headed to see Richard Hale, Noah's old friend and a federal investigator. Hale had once served as an intelligence liaison overseas. Years back, his convoy had been hit by an IED. He survived with a scar running from his cheekbone to his jaw, a carved reminder of the day he lost half his team. Since returning to the States, he carried his grief like armor, quiet and unyielding, but he was incorruptible, and that made him invaluable. When they reached Burlington, Hale was waiting in an unmarked government SUV parked behind a small cafe. He stepped out as they approached. Richard Hale was in his mid-40s, tall, with a disciplined bearing that suggested military service never truly leaves the bones. His hair was close-cropped and dark, touched slightly with gray at the temples. His pale blue eyes were sharp, scanning both Lila and the surroundings in one sweep. The long scar on his left cheek looked almost silver in the morning light, but his expression held a restrained warmth as he extended a hand. "Lila Moore," he said. "Noah's told me what he found. I'm glad you're standing." Lila managed a small nod, thanks to him and to Ranger. At the sound of his name, Ranger stepped forward, tail giving a dignified sway. Hale's gaze softened. "Good dog." His attention shifted back to the matter at hand. When Lila handed him the evidence bag, he turned it slowly between his fingers. His jaw tightened. "Professional," he murmured. "This isn't petty crime. Whoever's behind this has resources." Noah's voice was low, and someone in her department feeding them intel. Hale nodded once. "Then we work quiet." They spoke for nearly an hour. Lila recounted the attack in detail. The anonymous call, the ambush, the men, the threats, the beating. Hale listened without interrupting, his eyes narrowing at key points, filing information away behind a disciplined mind. When she finished, he placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You did everything right. Now, let me handle the rest." And he did. Over the next few weeks, Hale orchestrated an off-the-books investigation. He traced the supply chain, followed financial trails, and cross-referenced internal logs. Slowly, the pieces formed a clear picture, a small but well-armed distribution ring operating out of Vermont and New Hampshire, using the forest roads to move synthetic drugs. And embedded among them, someone from Lila's own precinct. The takedown was fast and decisive. The ringleaders were arrested in a coordinated raid. The insider, a sergeant with a years-long gambling debt and a talent for hiding lies, was taken into custody just after dawn. He didn't struggle. Perhaps he already knew the moment Lila failed to die in that barn, his fate was sealed. Lila was reinstated with honors. Her precinct chief handed her the commendation in a brief ceremony, his face stiff with shame for the betrayal she had endured. The applause was small, only a handful of colleagues she trusted, but it was enough. Noah received a private letter of thanks from the Naval Special Warfare Command. It meant little to him. Gratitude never filled the empty seats left by those he'd lost. But he accepted it, tucking it away without ceremony. And then the winter softened. The sun warmed the treetops. Snow melted from rooftops and clean streams. Ice cracked from branches and fell like broken glass. One morning, Lila returned to the cabin. Noah was standing on the porch, hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Ranger bounded ahead of him and reached her first, tail sweeping the snow in wide, joyful arcs. Lila crouched to greet him, laughter slipping from her lips, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in too long. When she rose, Noah was watching her with that quiet, steady expression he carried so easily. "Thanks to you," she said softly, "I'm still alive." Noah shook his head, a small smile warming the hard lines of his face. "You're thanking the wrong person," he said. "Ranger found you first." Lila reached down to ruffle the dog's fur. Ranger leaned into her touch, eyes half closed, as the winter sun spilled gold across the clearing. A new beginning, gentler, safer, was unfolding. And for the first time in a long time, Lila allowed herself to believe she might deserve it. Some journeys begin in silence, carried by cold winds and fear. Yet even in the harshest nights, grace can find its way to us. Lila survived because strength met compassion in the snow that day, but she also survived because God placed the right hearts in the right place at the right moment. It was a reminder that miracles do not always come with bright lights. Sometimes they arrive in the form of a tired soldier, a faithful dog, or a stranger who refuses to walk away. As we go through our own days, running errands, caring for family, facing worries we never speak of, it is easy to forget that divine protection watches over us too. But stories like this whisper a simple truth. We are never abandoned, not in the storm, not in the quiet moments when fear tries to take root, not even when hope feels thin. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that God still works in the shadows, guiding steps, protecting lives, and sending help in unexpected forms. Leave a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and let us pray together for safety, courage, and the gentle miracles we often overlook. And if you believe that God's hand can reach even through the snow, subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, bravery, and grace. May God bless you in your home tonight. Type Amen if you believe He still watches over us.